It'll be one to go this time by. Coming to the green, buddy, coming to the green. Let's go get him. Go, 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 go.
Get your motor running. Head out on the highway.
Chris, Jim, go.
Dustin Long, Landmark Newspapers. Jeff, I've got two questions. First one I want to ask you is, now that the odd tracks are out of the chase, it's down to 1.5 mile speedways and the 2 flat tracks, Martinsville and Phoenix. Similar type of tracks remaining. How does that, first of all, how does that change the dynamics of this chase now that you've gotten rid of the Talladega and the Dover?
Well, I still think that there are some huge variables here. I mean, I think Martinsville is, you know, potentially a volatile race. The thing about Talladega is you can run really well at Talladega and not have a problem and still finish 20th. You know, we had big wrecks, and that wasn't the case this week, but typically it's been the case. That's not so much the case here. I mean, here you can run well and have a problem and finish 38th, but if you run well and don't have a problem, you're probably going to finish pretty decent. Martinsville is the same way. You can run well, have a bad pit stop, you can make one mistake, lose 15 spots, boom, you can't pass, you know. So I still think there's a lot of variables. Atlanta's exceptionally hard. This racetrack's extremely demanding. The racetracks, there's not a racetrack that we have coming that we all look at and say, well, that's not a difficult racetrack. It requires, to be successful at every racetrack we're going to, requires a great deal of ability of your team and the driver. So I think it's a great test of who's on top of their game, because I think the next 6 races are very, very difficult.
The second question I had for you is, obviously history is not going to determine what happens here in the next 6 races, but you look at what Jimmy Johnson has done in these races the last 2 years.
Sure.
9 top 2 finishes and 12 combined. How, as a driver, as a team, do you not let that knowledge, that history impact your decision making, or let that worry
Sure.
you, because everybody's going to look at, he's got it set for the next 6?
Well, if you look at I think if you look at Charlotte and Martinsville in particular, you know, I haven't studied the stats, but I would imagine that those are 2 of Jimmy's best racetracks. I think that's, you know, maybe I'm wrong, but I believe that would probably be the case. And if you're not a student of history, then it's very hard to be very good at the future. There is no question that they've been consistently better at these next 2 racetracks than the rest of the field. I don't think there's no debating that. It is what it is. What we have to do is do it better. I mean, they have set a standard at these 2 racetracks that are very difficult to overcome, but we just have to do it. And you know, we're not going to give it to him. They're going to have to go earn it. You know, it is what it is. They've done it better than we have, and we just got to go. We got to go knock them off of it. I mean, we can't ask them nicely to give it to us. We just got to go take it from them, and you know, that's what we got to go do.
Chris, and then right over here. Go ahead.
Chris Johnson, NASCAR scene. Jeff, we've seen some pretty big-name drivers end winless streaks this year with Junior at Michigan, Tony last week at Talladega, and now Jeff Gordon seems to be the guy that everybody looks to and says, you know, when is he going to win again? Having gone through this in your career, I think it was roughly a 5-year span between that win at Phoenix and then Dover.
Makes 30 races seem pretty small.
Facing those questions every week, how much of a drain is that, and does it perpetuate a streak? And also, from the outside looking in, what do you think is wrong with Jeff Gordon, if anything?
Well, first of all, if anybody believes Jeff Gordon forgot how to drive, they've lost their mind. If anybody believes Jeff Gordon still doesn't want to win, they've lost their mind. You know, this thing about being successful is a whole lot more to do with the driver, the team, the whole deal working together than people give credit for. The media and the fans are really quick to give credit to the driver when things are going well. You know, if that guy can just drive, he's a great driver, you know, he can do this and he can do that. 2 years later, they're always saying, well, you know, that guy, you know, he's not as good anymore. You've got to have stuff that'll go fast. You've got to have stuff that you can get done what you need to get done with. And by the way, you can have something that works really, really well for one guy, but it doesn't work well for you. that's part of the process of getting the right group of people together. You can put, we can argue about who the best quarterback is in the NFL. We could have that argument, but you could put the very best quarterback in the situation where he doesn't look like the very best quarterback. And by the way, you can put the worst quarterback in the situation where he looks pretty damn good. So I think it's important to understand that you've got to have the right combination together at the right time. There's nothing wrong with Jeff Gordon, other than, I shouldn't say there's nothing wrong with Jeff Gordon. He's part of the puzzle. He's a piece of the puzzle that makes that entire program be successful. So he has some equity in it. You can't just say, well, it's never his fault, because the drivers have equity in it. But it takes everything. You can't just have one piece of the puzzle working and think you're going to have a lot of success. And the other thing, when you set a high standard, when you set a really high standard, the year Jeff Gordon's had this year, I'd venture to say there's probably about 40 teams that would kill to have the kind of year he's had. They haven't had a terrible year. They just haven't been able to knock some wins off, which obviously is what we're here to do. But Jeff Gordon hadn't forgot how to win races. He hadn't forgot how to race. A lot of people, well, he had a kid. I mean, it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. He had a kid and he doesn't care anymore. I mean, what do you think if you have a kid, you just wake up one morning and say, well, I don't care anymore. I got a kid, and I got a child. I love my child, so I don't need a trophy anymore. I mean, competitive people don't work like that. That's why when George Foreman retired, he came back. It's why when Michael Jordan retired, he came back. It's because you have it in you. And Jeff Gordon didn't wake up the day his baby was born and look at the baby and say, oh, my life's all changed now, I don't need to race anymore. I mean, it doesn't work like that. I mean, does it work like that for anybody in here? I mean, race car drivers are no different than anybody else. And I think it's absurd that people think that you can't have a family life, care about your children and care about your wife, and not be competitive. I think that's absurd.
Final question right here. Go ahead.
Yes, Jeff Hill, Overton, WIXC Radio. Charlotte, Atlanta, Texas. All 24 degrees of banking, all mile-and-a-halves, all double dogleg front straightaways. Subtleties, what are the differences that you see between those three? How would you contrast them?
You confused me earlier. What were the tracks again? Charlotte,
Atlanta, Texas.
Charlotte, Atlanta, Texas. Well, they all look the same. That's the similarities. They do look, especially Atlanta and Texas. When you're in the garage area, you're not real sure which track you're at. But the thing about racetracks is that every one of them has its own personality. Atlanta in qualifying is just exceptionally fast, but in the race it has no grip whatsoever. It's the slickest place you've ever been in all your life. Texas has a lot of grip, keeps that grip. It's much rougher, and there's some really big bumps at Texas that we don't have at the other racetracks. Banking and size are just parts of the puzzle. There's also the degree, the way the banking changes from the straightaway to the corner, the radius of the corners. You can have mile-and-a-half racetracks, but the radius of the corners can be completely different. So radius of the corners, how the banking changes from the straightaway to the corners, all those things have a huge impact on what makes a racetrack have its personality. Bumps at the wrong places. There's a big bump in the middle, 1 and 2 at Texas. Every one, even though they look the same to the drivers, they're completely different.
Jeff, we appreciate it very much. Always enjoy having you in here, and best of luck this weekend.